Welcome to Module 4 of the Shelter and Settlements training course. This module will look at settlements and their intervention within the humanitarian context. Click Next to continue.
Hello again. This is the fourth of 5 training videos on humanitarian shelter and settlements assistance. This session will focus on the settlement side of the shelter and settlements sector. Key points to be discussed during this session include: settlements are the where of our mandate, understanding how settlements shape our work, and recent settlements interventions.
The current and future vulnerabilities of the world population are the possible consequences of many adverse trends, for example, climate change, environmental degradation, natural hazards, demographic transition, urbanization, violence, forced migration, known and novel diseases, and insecurity of access to food, water, and natural resources. The ever-increasing global population is leading towards exponential increase in urban population density. As previously discussed, each time an urban population doubles, 3 times the amount of land is needed for adequate and secure habitation. This urban growth, in turn, creates illegal and economically insecure settlements that are both geographically and environmentally vulnerable. The problems and issues that follow are numerous, creating vulnerable communities with chronic need that are further exacerbated by both natural and man-made hazards. As a result, we have seen the acceleration of this pattern, with disasters happening more frequently, in more urban areas, with more intensity, and with higher level of destruction. This results in the affected community's ability to absorb the impact. Each disaster, each conflict, is also creating more urban displacement, bringing us full circle to more communities with chronic needs, compounded by acute need. One of the biggest questions we will be faced with this decade is, how should we address urban displacement? Settlements are where we live, work, and play, and settlements provide us with context in which we respond. Settlements are the where of our mandate. We are finding ourselves working more and more in complex urban settlements, which have certain common characteristics. 1. We work in many places that are prone to disasters and have limited access to services. 2. Lack of sanitation facilities such as inadequate garbage management and ineffective sewage treatment. 3. Growing, informal, unauthorized, and illegal settlements with significant socioeconomic issues. 4. Increasing vulnerabilities such as public health and livelihood due to weak governance and lack of adequate public resources. It is important that we are prepared in our approach and strategies to respond to disasters that are increasing with greater frequency and intensity within an urban context. Unlike rural settlements, urban communities rely heavily on interconnected and interdependent networks. For most of us, our roles and mandates do not include town or urban planning. However, by carrying out settlements intervention during disaster recovery period, it is possible to lay down foundations for that stage of development. Settlement interventions can and often do provide linkages between humanitarian and development assistance. So what do we do? What do we do as part of our shelter settlement intervention in those places? Some of the case studies we're going to explore today are Kinshasa in 1998, Goma in 2002, Kabul in 2006, and Port-au-Prince in 2010. Click each case study to view it in detail. At the end of 1997 and early 1998, torrential rains had inundated the homes and businesses of 10,000 residents in 2 communities of Kinshasa with an estimated 3,000 cubic meters of sand and mud. The damage and dislocation was widespread, indirectly affecting an additional 19,000 residents through disrupted transportation and adversely affected livelihoods. The initial intervention, funded by OFDA and carried out through Catholic Relief Services, CRS, began in May 1998 to assist in emergency cleanup activities in the two communes of Kinshasa. The intervention focused on understanding the causes while attempting to provide immediate relief of flooding. Assessments regarding the commune's proximity to adjacent watersheds and the commune's vulnerability to future reoccurring flooding was conducted through interviews with the residents, the results of which provided a basis for a flood and erosion reduction project. During the 6-month period of the project, 17 small dams were constructed in the watershed adjacent to the communes. These dams were made from bamboo cuttings, grass, and sandbags. 3 water retention basins were strengthened, drainage canals were cleaned, and portions of the watershed were seeded with grass. Local residents were organized to perform the work and maintain improvements. Residents were also provided with information on the importance of reducing flood hazards, maintaining drains and waterways free from refuse and other materials, as well as public health. These adopted disaster reduction measures were tested severely when torrential rain visited Kinshasa again. Although 2 of the 17 dams failed, no flood-related damage was sustained in the 2 communes, no residents were injured or displaced, and no livelihoods were affected. By adopting conservative assumptions and only accounting for direct economic losses, $1 of investment in disaster risk reduction in 1998 resulted in a savings of at least $46 during the 1999 season. The savings has occurred up to the present time, thereby compounding the initial benefit several times over. This success was repeated in another commune of Kinshasa in 2000 through 2001 when the 1999 torrential rains generated similar damage to the housing, possessions, and livelihoods of 50,000 residents. Adopting measures used in the earlier project, the mitigation activities began in early 2000 and have since continued to prevent further flood damage to the commune. An additional, unintended benefit of reducing flood risk in this commune has been the contribution of project activities in improving public health conditions. A 2002 study by the DRC Ministry of Health indicated that project risk reduction measures, together with the public health education component of the project, combined to improve commune environmental conditions to such an extent that the incidence of cholera was reduced by over 90% when compared to pre-flood conditions. In January 2002, the Nyiragongo volcano erupted near Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo, devastating a city of 450,000 people. In less than a day, lava covered 13% of the city, an area of nearly 2 square miles, and destroyed up to 15,000 homes. The lava flew through the downtown commercial area, thousands of jobs were lost, and the urban and regional economy was devastated. More than 300,000 people had to flee in panic to Rwanda. Focus of this shelter and settlement response was the provision of 5,000 transitional shelters and, most importantly, disaster risk reduction activities. While the displaced population did not want to move away from the city nor move into camps, return was not yet possible during the transitional phase. In order to reduce further displacement, it was agreed that transitional shelters should be built in surrounding neighborhoods with functioning services. The other 87% of the city not covered in lava had relatively low density, and the response quite intentionally and carefully increased the density in order to accommodate those displaced by the volcano eruption. The DRR activities included support of the Goma Volcano Observatory through improved volcano hazard monitoring equipment, staff trainings, and provision of technical assistances. It also included supporting a 2-year community-based DRR program to enhance early warning systems, upgrade evacuation routes, and improve community awareness on what to do and where to go during eruptions and earthquakes. Both of these areas of response generated local livelihoods that were essential in promoting the transition to recovery and reconstruction. More than 10 years after the eruption, the long-term impact of these projects is visible to varying degrees. We discovered that nearly 100% of these transitional shelters have been upgraded and expanded to become permanent housing by the community. GVO volcano monitoring continues, with most of the equipment still functioning, though upgrades are needed. GVO continues many of the same community-based education activities supported earlier, such as providing a volcano activity weekly report on local radio stations, sharing information at a local volcano information center, and updating alert levels in public areas. The long-term impacts are significant when SNS programs look into broader issues in the settlements rather than just providing shelters. We have briefly touched on this case study in Module 1. As you will remember, Kabul's population growth was intensified due to returning refugees and migrants between 2002 and 2007. The rapid and unplanned increase have forced settlements to be formed on land that is unsuitable for habitation, with families living in landslide and flood-prone areas with exposure to protection risks. Volatility amid continuing efforts to eradicate the insurgency, the recurring drought and environmental degradation, and limited employment opportunities were creating push factors. Meanwhile, natural disasters in communities with poor risk management and response capacities continue to erode coping mechanisms in rural areas, thus prompting residents to flee to urban areas of Kabul and other cities. Current and future migration rates remain unpredictable, respectively adding additional challenges to urban recovery planning in the capital city. By 2009, 35% of Afghanistan's population was living in urban areas. The city's metro population went from around 500,000 people in 2001 to over 5 million today. The rapid nature of Kabul's population growth, coupled with the continued reliance on the 1978 master plan designed to accommodate only 2 million people, resulted in one of the highest rates of informal housing in the world. Although Kabul is not reportedly faced with homelessness, approximately 80% of the total population resides in unauthorized and unrecognized areas that lack adequate drainage, refuse disposal, graveled roads, safe drinking water, and sanitation facilities. In 2006, Kabul Area Shelter and Settlements Project, KASS, was launched. KASS was carried out in close collaboration with Kabul Municipality and includes a Shelter Assistance Project, Shelter Opportunities Survey, SOS, and seismic preparedness and mitigation activities. This project provides seismic-resistant transitional shelter while also improving basic services and infrastructure using local labor and resources. It highlights local shelter-related income generation activities that promote recovery and ownership of projects. Working mostly in informal settlements, the work ranged from brick making to improving drainage and community sanitation infrastructure. This project was vital in developing and refining our approach to shelter and settlements. In addition to addressing geopolitical, humanitarian, and disaster risk reduction issues in perhaps the world's fastest-growing city, this effort in Kabul also saw the emergence of the neighborhood approach, integrating multi-sector activities in socially defined spaces. This approach is critical to working in urban settlements, the size of which will at least triple by 2020. These growing urban areas will be adding to the backlog of current needs, and they will require major institutional and technical capacity upgrades. This brings us to the last case study we will be sharing with you in this module, the neighborhood approach in Haiti. In January of 2010, a devastating 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck close to the country's capital city of Port-au-Prince. The earthquake and its aftershocks caused damage and destruction to over 200,000 houses and affected over 3 million people, more than 200,000 of which were estimated to have lost their lives. Like many of the urban conditions we have discussed, Port-au-Prince was also an urban center faced with rapid unplanned and unserviced population growth. Informal settlements were sprawled up into the hillsides, construction was lacking quality and standard mitigation practices. During our assessments, it became clear that many of the death tolls were the results of unplanned and high-density living conditions of these settlements, as well as the lack of preparedness in communities. Access pathways were steep, narrow, and congested. No prearranged escape routes were marked or planned out, and for many, there were simply no escape routes during the earthquake. It was quickly realized that providing shelter alone would not be solving their problems. There was hardly enough land to build transitional shelters to sphere standards, and many of the informal settlement sites faced the risk of flash floods and landslides. In order to improve living conditions of these settlements, Project Concern International, PCI, and CHF International engaged in the neighborhood approach. This included removing all debris and refuse, replanning and reblocking of the site to create better access and evacuation routes, installation of drainage to avoid flash floods and landslides, construction of retaining walls to stabilize the ground, and the addition of water points according to need. These activities were not without challenges, for it did not start with a blank canvas, nor did it start with an equal level of need for the whole community. Some of the houses are still standing, some were simply damaged, while others were totally destroyed. Reblocking had to allow for the houses that are still standing, and shelter delivery had to accommodate larger families. In the end, a number of shelter solutions were used in one settlement. The decisions on which shelter solution should be used were made according to community need. There are smaller single-story shelters used as a standard solution, and then there are two-story shelters that were used for larger families to provide them with more space without occupying more land. In fact, the use of two-story shelters allowed for more open space in the community that helped with overall community planning. Transition into permanent. Most of the transitional shelters that are built have a sound structural component, but with temporary cladding. It is expected that over time, upgrading of these structures will take place. Some will become permanent, or defer to the material that was used prior to the disaster, or some can be dismantled and reused in the construction of permanent housing. This process can often happen for most without additional external support, though the speed at which they will happen depends on each family's ability to access resources and networks, or what we will likely call their self-recovery capacity. However, in some cases, this is not possible, and some organizations were funded to provide people with support to upgrade transitional shelters in Haiti.
Key points to remember from Session 4 include understanding the multifaceted character of context settlements can lead to effective multi-sector responses to identified needs. Much like framing a house, the need for framing the response and follow-on reconstruction is critical. This includes settlements planning, as most official plans are aspirational, perhaps even inspirational, but not often operational. Let's move on to Session 5, the last session in the training.